Welcome back to this tutorial series. In the last video, we covered the interface of the editor, game modes, importing a character controller, and creating a ball within the Cyber material. In this tutorial, we're going to look into using the Blueprint system to assign a kicking animation to our player. And then, we'll make a makeshift foot so the player can interact with the ball. There's plenty of work to do, so let's get to it. Before we can do anything, this project has downloadable content that is available with the link in the description. This folder contains a kicking animation for the player and a firework effect that we'll use later in the project. Once you've downloaded and extracted the files, let's get them imported into the project. To start, open up your content drawer. From here, right-click on your content folder at the side and select Show in Explorer. Here we can see the content that's inside our project. Select the tutorial assets pack that we've just downloaded and drag them into the project. If we make our way back to the editor, we can see the new assets folder that we've just added. As you can see though, the folder should be empty. To fix this, you need to close and reopen the project. Just make sure you save your progress before you do. When we reopen the project, we should now see that our assets show up in the content browser. Great! Now, let's try to implement the kicking animation onto our character. To do this, navigate to the third-person controller blueprint that we imported in the last tutorial. This is found in the third-person and blueprints folder. Once opened, we should be greeted with the code that makes this controller work. If you can't find this, head over to the Event Graph tab. For now, we don't need to know how this controller works, so let's just find an empty space within the graph for us to work in. In order for this animation to play, we need to assign it to a keyboard command. Let's assign it to the E key. To find the command for this, right-click in the empty space of the graph. In the new window, let's search for key E. If we look to the bottom of this search, we'll find the keyboard events category. Searching through this category will present us with the E key. Now that we have a reference to our E key, let's find the animation. Right-click into the event graph again, and search for Play Montage. The Play Montage node we're looking for will be found under the Montage tab. A montage in Unreal is similar to playing an animation. However, we have access to more advanced features and greater control over blending, sequencing, and timing of the animations. Once we have our montage node, let's select the kicking animation in the Montage to Play section. Next, let's grab a reference to our character's skeletal mesh by selecting it and dragging it into the event graph. We can then feed this into the skeletal mesh node. Now what we need to do is to feed the press node from our key event into the montage. Once we've done this, let's compile and save this blueprint and exit back to the editor. If we press play and then press the E key, our character should now perform the kicking animation. One thing to note though, if we keep pressing our E key, our character will keep trying to perform the animation. So let's fix that. Let's escape out of play mode and open up the controller's blueprint again. If we want to make this animation play once, we're going to need to add a check to see if the player is currently kicking. If we look to the left, we'll see the Variables tab. In here, we can add variables to a blueprint such as integers, booleans, floats, etc. Clicking the plus icon will allow us to create a new variable. Lucky for us, the default variable should be a boolean. While we're at it, let's rename this variable to isKicking. If you didn't get a boolean as your default, you can select it by using the drop-down box on the variable. Once created, let's create a reference to this variable by dragging it into the event graph and selecting Get. Because we want to insert this into our code, we need to break the connection. We can do this by right-clicking on the node and then selecting Break Node Links. From here, we want to create a statement that says if the boolean is true, perform something. To do this, pull out the execute pin from the event we created and search for if. You'll notice that the suggested action is a branch node. A branch node is the same as an if statement found within Unity. This allows us to check if a statement is true or false. If we look at the branch node, you'll see that we can feed in a condition. So let's feed our isKicking condition into it by connecting the pins. Now that we have our condition laid out, let's create a custom event that we can call if the statement's conditions are met. Let's right-click into the event graph and search for Custom Event. And then, let's rename this event to Kick. Now that we have our custom event, we'll start by stating that we want to set the isKicking boolean to true. To do this, drag a reference to your isKicking boolean into the graph and then click Set. Once we have our reference, connect the execution pins from our custom event into the set node. Now, we can state that we want to set this boolean to true by clicking on the checkbox. We can then connect the execution pin from our set node into our montage. To finish off this rule, we can grab another reference to our isKicking boolean and then click Set. Make sure that this is set to false by leaving the checkbox unticked. We can then set this by connecting it to the uncompleted node from montage. As you can see, we've now created a boolean that states that when we call our custom event, we set the isKicking variable to true, and when the montage is finished playing, this variable will be set to false. We can now call this custom event by creating a reference to it in our previous statement. All we need to do is drag out from our false execution pin and search for kick. If we compile and save this blueprint, we can see if our code is performing correctly by returning to the editor and clicking play. Now, if we keep pressing our E key, our animation should only play once. Awesome! One thing to note is that if we try and kick our ball, our player doesn't interact with it very well. So let's fix that. Let's head back into the third-person blueprint, and then navigate into the viewport. Our aim is to create a fake foot that will collide with the ball at the location of the player's right foot. To do this, let's add a sphere into the viewport by clicking on Add and searching for Sphere. Once the sphere is in the viewport, let's change the scale by setting its X, Y and Z variables to 0.4 in the Details tab. Next, let's parent it to the player's mesh by dragging the sphere into the mesh in the Components tab. Now that it's parented, we can select a bone for the sphere to be attached to by selecting the parent socket. Let's search for the right foot. After doing this, our ball will reorient itself in the editor view. We can relocate this by editing the location values in the Details tab. A good setup for this would be to set the X to -8, the Y to -33, and the Z to -3. Great! Now that our makeshift foot is in position, let's compile and save this blueprint and head back into the editor. After pressing play, our player should now be able to kick the ball as intended. Awesome! Now, there's just one matter left to attend to. Let's make it so we can't see this new ball that we've created. If we head back into our materials folder, let's create another material by right-clicking into the content drawer and selecting Material. For now, let's call this m_foot. For this material, our aim is to make it transparent so that we can't see the ball attached to the player. To do this, let's change the blend mode of the material on the left from opaque to transparent. Doing this will allow us to edit the opacity node on the base material. Just like our previous material, let's add a constant node to represent a value. Just make sure that the value for this is set to the default 0. Once finished, apply and save this material. And then we can head back to the third-person blueprint. Make sure that your sphere is selected and head over to the Materials tab in Details. From here, we can select the newly created material. Awesome! Let's compile and save this blueprint and head back to the editor. And now if we press play, our character's football should no longer be visible. Great! For now though, that's all we have time for, so see you in the next tutorial.